Thank you for being here. Thank you for having invited me to this side event and to this and allowing me to do this presentation. Just before starting, I am here representing the Institute for Economics and Peace. I'm going to go over the Terrorism Index, and I am not talking as a Lieutenant Colonel or a member of the Belgian Armed Forces. So please do not make a relation between all the things I'm going to say in the next 10 minutes and any position that the Belgian Armed Forces or the Belgian Royal Military Academy would hold. Bottom line up front, and this is maybe a military approach. From what my predecessors have said, I can only concur to what you have said. And of course, as a Belgian, when I look at the migration flow and the attacks in both Brussels and Paris, I can recognize that most of the members, or a large part of the members of the Belgian or French parts of the group who committed the attacks in November 15 and in March 2016, those who came from outside of Europe have been picked up out of the asylum flow, either in asylum camps in Ulm in Germany or directly at the train station in Budapest, for example. And to concur with what my other colleague has said, I could say that on Belgian TV you see sometimes very awkward things, but one of the most awkward things that I saw in the past year was a documentary on Belgians fighting Belgians in Iraq, where a Belgian Peshmerga captain was firing at Daesh positions in Iraq, where it was known that also Belgian nationals were at that moment. So this is something that is really stressing for, I would say, a Belgian citizen. Next, please. So I work for the Institute for Economics and Peace, and we are also a non-profit aiming at making people understand the key drivers and measures that can be taken for peace, but also to also tell the world that a situation in which there is no conflict, a stable and peaceful situation is a much better economic situation also. Next, please. This is how we work, so please have a look at the definition, and especially at the non-state actor part of the definition. So for us, global terrorism is the use of illegal force and violence by a non-state actor to attain a political, economic, religious, or social goal through fear, coercion, or intimidation. I think it's very important to always start with the definition and see how we collect the data related to this definition. I've been asked also to talk about what NATO is doing in the South Asian region and what Europe is doing or the EU is doing in the South Asian region. I think it's very difficult to have this approach. The focus currently for both organizations is on the periphery of Europe or the Euro-Atlantic area, and of course looking at the MENA region, Middle East and Northern Africa. There is of course an outlook further on, but I would say that when you look at both organizations, NATO, it's all about mitigation. And so the only real tool in the toolbox is a military tool, like a big hammer, and then you will always find a nail to use your hammer on, and maybe a political statement. When you look at the EU, the toolbox is a little bit more extended, and you will have a more softer approach. So if you would look at NATO, of course, you have the intervention in Afghanistan. If you would look at the EU, I think they are used, or the EU would be much more effective in other phases of the evolution of a conflict. At the height of the fight, or at the height of the use of violence, I think NATO would be the perfect manager for the crisis. When it comes to prevention or to stabilization, I think that the EU would be more appropriate. Efforts of the EU in the region, I think you can look at the cooperation of the EU with ASEAN, developing also the crisis response capabilities of ASEAN in the region. Please go on. Yes, the results. When you look at the results, I picked two, then you can just click twice, please. When we look at the data for the Global Terrorism Index 2016, we see a spread of the phenomenon. We see a spread of the phenomenon to more countries. So more countries have been affected, have had at least one terrorist attack or one person killed in their on their soil. But we see that the relative impact is lower. So this is a trend that has been confirmed also for 2017, where you see that more countries are really involved, are really targeted, but with less impact. So overall, the Global Terrorism Index levels have dropped by 4%. Then you can always look at those figures also. Global terrorism, 75% of all attacks occur in only 5 countries and are perpetrated by only 4 groups. These 4 groups are Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and of course ISIL or Daesh. The 5 countries, and this is maybe a concept that has not been explained before, is the concept of the Ummah. The Ummah starting, I would say, in Western Africa, a country like Nigeria going over the Middle East, where you see countries like Syria and Iraq really impacted by terrorism, and finishing down in Southeast Asia, up down to Indonesia, a country like the Philippines or Indonesia, where in this part of the world you see countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan really impacted by terrorism. So 5 countries, 4 groups, and the idea of the Ummah that throughout, and this is something that we maybe don't know or do not recognize in the West, that throughout this entire part of the world, my prophet is your prophet, my God is your God, and my Islam is your Islam. So it doesn't matter if you are Nigerian or you live in the Philippines. Basically, you fight for the same cause. This is available, of course, on our website also. This allows you, of course, to recognize what is called, what in the academic world, as the arch of instability or the wedge of hardship, as said, starting from Western Africa and going down to Southeast Asia with the 5 main countries that I've been spoken of about before. On the website, you can click on every country, and then you get the specific data about those country, the ranking, but also the type of attacks, the amount of attacks, people killed, people injured, and damage to property. Next, please. This is the ranking in which you don't want to see your country appear. This is the top 10 of the Global Terrorism Index. Look at the differences or the changes in those in this top 10. This is a consistent top 10, and almost every year it's the same top 10. 9 of those 10 countries are directly affected by what we could call Islamist terrorism. Only India is in this top 10 for other reasons, or for reasons that are not mainly related to Islamist terrorism, like more political reasons. You also see a country coming back again, and this is the first time since 2002. It's Turkey, which brings me back to one of the bullets that was already on screen before. 99.5% of the percent of all terrorist attacks occurring globally occur either in a situation in which there's an armed conflict going on, or in a situation in which human rights and political rights are not respected. So in countries in which there is a high level of political terror. So 99.5% of all terrorist attacks in the world occur in these two conditions. So these 2 causes can be seen as the key drivers for terrorism. Next, please. So I've also looked to South Asia outside of the top 10, and then you see a gradation between top 12 with Philippines going down to 68, Sri Lanka, and then even more. Thank you. Next, please. This is a slide that I basically use in all my presentation about global terrorism, because this is showing you the evolution of the impact of terrorism throughout, I would say, the 21st century, since the start of this century. Of course, we have a peak on September 11, 2001, and can it be seen as a game changer? I mean, that's an open discussion for scholars. But what you see is all the major intervention, major Western intervention or acts of Western foreign policy in the coming 15 years, and their impact on the level of the relative level of terrorism in affected countries and also in the rest of the world. And what you see is that the US invasion of Afghanistan, which is basically the retaliation for 9/11, has been accepted locally but also globally. This trend changes in 2003 when the invasion of Iraq, where there was, I think you all know, more discussion about the legitimacy of the intervention. And then we have a peak in 2 minutes, I would do that. We have a peak in 2007 where the US sent more troops and start to collaborate with the Sunni tribes. But I think we all know what happened in 2011, 2 things: the intervention in Libya and also the start of the Syrian conflict and the non-intervention of or no Western policy acts or red lines that were not respected. Then you see an exponential increase in the level of terrorism throughout the region, but also in the rest of the world after that. Thank you. So the next one, this is showing you where terrorism occurs on a daily basis. And 22nd of March 2016, the attacks in Brussels, the 2 most awkward messages that I received was from colleagues in Kabul and Baghdad asking me if I was okay. And I said, do I send you an email every day, or do I send you a text message every day asking if you are okay? So there is a different perception about security, about vulnerability in some parts of the world and in Western parts of the world also. But when you look at those figures, you realize that Europe is, of course, targeted, but there we look at the vulnerability because Europe or the West is thinking that we are thinking we are living in very secure environments, very secure societies, and then, of course, when you get targeted, the sentiment of vulnerability is much higher. But basically, terrorism is a problem of the rest of the world, and of course of the MENA region, but you see also of South Asia on this slide, and please note also the figures for Northern America. Next, please. This is showing you an evolution of these 4 groups, and I think it's really disturbing to see that the red one, which is ISIL, so you see, of course, an increase of ISIL. This is because of the fights in Iraq in 2016, so there is a large increase over there also. Next one. The foreign terrorist fighters, and I think this is one of the last slides, foreign terrorist fighters. So when you look at those countries, you don't really see South Asian countries appearing in this top 10, either in total or in percentage of regarding to a rate of 100,000 inhabitants. And this is giving you also a certain indication. Next, please. Yeah, so you can connect with us and visit us on a website, but also on social media. And maybe a last thing that I would like to say to really finish this time is to say that if there is a connection between South Asia and Europe when it comes to terrorism, I think that we will see where terrorism is really active. It's not in Europe, it's South Asia. Is there a connection from people traveling to Europe, to the West, to commit the attacks? Yes, but from the research that I've made myself and from the information that we have, we see that when you look at the perpetrators of the attacks in Europe, yes, there is a migration background. When you look at for Belgium, for example, 80% of the foreign terrorist fighters are of Moroccan origin, so there is a migration background. And those who migrate to your countries and have a Muslim religion, you will find them back there also. But they perpetrate the attacks after 10, 15, they are either born in Belgium or perpetrate the attacks after a long period of stay in our country. So that's the only connection that can be made, to my opinion, between South Asia and or other countries and Europe. It's really this lack of integration after a migration problem, and maybe not directly direct link between migration and terrorism. Thank you very much. Also looking forward to your questions afterwards.